The writer and actors strike is dragging on, and influencers can't talk about recent television and movies.
You're going to use all this time to write great scripts, right? You're going to use all this time to write great scripts, right?
I'll wear your granddad's clothes. I look incredible. I'm in this big ass coat from that thrift shop down the road. I'll wear your granddad's clothes. Damn right. I look incredible. Hey, come on, man. I'm in this big ass coat from that thrift shop down the road. I'm gonna pop some tags. Only got $20 in my pocket. I'm hunting, looking for a comer. This is fucking awesome.
So it's been an interesting time to be a movie YouTuber. The writer's strike, of course, slowed a lot of things down, as did the actor's strike. But with everything looking like it's back in place and deals have been reached, film YouTube can actually start back up again. And I wanted to launch into this with an unboxing video. Before I mention any studio names or anything like that, I would like to take a moment to verify that, yes, in fact, this video is unsponsored. So anything you're going to hear about this studio or that distributor or any company in general is completely unpaid. It doesn't have to be. Any company out there that ever wants to pay me can, in fact, pay me. But for today, what you're watching is completely unpaid, unsponsored. I did not receive any of these things for free. I paid for everything you're about to see. So the box that we're looking at today, fairly hefty fellow, is from VCI Entertainment. Now, for those of you who have seen some of my other unboxings, VCI is a little bit different from the other boutique Blu-ray distributors that I've talked about before. VCI is a company that goes back here in America long before even VHS really hit the home market. They used to be a distributor of 8mm, 16mm, 35mm prints to secondary movie houses. They provided video masters to television stations, that sort of thing. Apparently, it is still a family-owned business. It started originally as a young man just selling tickets to people to come watch his movie collection in their backyard, and turned into a multi-generational company that has been dedicated to distributing and preserving movies. They're doing a very cool thing right now where they've started their own streaming service that displays some of their more public domain materials, that sort of thing. And if you subscribe to a year of their streaming service, then you get entered into what they call their DVD club. And among other benefits of their DVD club is a 60% discount on all of their own titles through their website. Now, if you're like a lot of people out there and you're like, great, I need another streaming service like I need a hole in the head, well, it turns out that the VCI Entertainment website will just sell you the DVD Club membership without selling you the streaming service. So about $20 a year or so, I think, is what they were charging. And it gets you the same benefit. It gets you 60% off, which, if you're a big fan of the types of movies that VCI Entertainment handles, which I am, then you're going to wind up making that back in savings pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and take a moment, and we're going to open up this box. And this box is full. I mean, it is very full. When I got my 60% discount initially, I may have gone a little bit overboard on ordering some of their titles, but let's take a look at what I've got here. First out of the box here, we have Santo el Enmascarado de Plata, the Silver Masked. Santo's an interesting character because there's been a lot of people over the past few years, past couple of decades really, who have treated him like he's just some kind of like folkloric hero who was put into movies. But Santo was a real person. Rodolfo Guzman Huerta, who was known as El Santo, has been the only Santo. It isn't a character who passes from person to person. It was Huerta. And this is 8 movies featuring Rodolfo Guzman Huerta. So Huerta was the fifth of 7 children. He originally trained for American football, studied jiu-jitsu, before becoming a professional wrestler for his career. Santo originally entered movies through comic book stardom. Artist Jose G. Cruz turned the wrestler into a comic book superhero, and then that comic would run for 35 years. In the late 50s, Mexican film producers decided to cash in on the comics by casting Santo originally as a sidekick and then ultimately moving him into a starring role. This is 8 movies in this set. Santo actually appeared in 52 luchador films, starring in most of them, taking the starring role. 1982 was when Santo retired from the ring and from film. The last time that he appeared in film was for Fury of the Karate Experts. And 1982, as I said, also the last time that he appeared in the ring. Santo passed away in 1984 at the age of 66. He had, at the time, 11 children, only one of whom was interested in a career in professional wrestling. Rodolfo Huerta debuted as El Hijo de Santo, the son of the saint, in 1982. And he has, in fact, appeared in a single movie, Infraterrestre, in 2001, playing his father's role. The Huerta family treats the Santo legacy very seriously. Only one other wrestler not directly related to Rodolfo has ever been allowed to use a Santo identity. That was Irma Gonzalez, who in the early 60s requested and received permission from Santo to wrestle under the name La Novia del Santo, or the Bride of the Saint. She only wrestled under the name for about 7 months, and then after marrying, she retired from the ring. However, when another wrestler stepped in and tried to take over the name of the Bride of the Saint, El Santo wound up filing a lawsuit to stop her. All right, so next up in this box we have The Treasure of Dracula, the sexy vampire version. Given the high level of respect for El Santo and his native Mexico, I have some mixed feelings about this movie. It's an important historical artifact that I'm glad has been preserved, but it must be said that this is not the way that Santo, or necessarily the Huerta family in general, wanted his legacy to be remembered. So Santo and the Treasure of Dracula was originally released as a fairly standard Santo film, but the version that they have on this disc was a full-color version that inserted scenes with full frontal nudity, not featuring El Santo, that was released in Europe as El Vampiro y el Sexo. So this was intended to play to the adults-only audience. Now, after an intact copy of this film was discovered, the Guadalajara International Film Festival sponsored a restoration, intending to premiere it as part of a selection of vampire cinema that Guillermo del Toro curated for them. The premiere was delayed because El Hijo del Santo attempted to file suit to block the film from being displayed, but it still premiered after the festival's legal team determined that there was no case. Now, how exactly Santo felt about a version of his movie being edited for adult audiences is the subject of much debate. There's not a whole lot of record keeping around these movies. According to some people, this is the only movie of Santo's that this was ever done with. However, according to other sources, there were at least as many as 8 movies that he filmed that received a similar treatment. Again, the record keeping was not great. This is pretty much the only one that we genuinely have a record of this happening to. And it's also up for debate as to how El Santo himself felt about it, or whether he even really knew about it when it was happening, because the story, the official story, is that when Santo discovered that this movie was playing overseas, he was horrified, he threatened to end his contract, and he insisted that the movie be called back and destroyed, which is why so few copies of it exist now. On the other hand, there are other people who worked with El Santo who will tell you that he was completely aware that this movie existed, and in fact received extra pay for appearing in movies that were allowed to be edited in this manner. According to those people, Santo had no problem with the movies existing so long as they would not be distributed in his native Mexico. It was important to him that his image was preserved in his home country. All right, and so next up here we have the Aztec Mummy Collection. We have a lot of Mexican films in this particular order. The Aztec Mummy series was a Mexican franchise created by screenwriter Alfredo Salazar, who for most of the golden age of Mexican cinema was best known for writing comedies. The first film in the series was actually his conscious attempt to break out of comedy by pulling inspiration from the Universal monsters. The success of the movie touched off a boom in Mexican-produced monster movies, with an awful lot of them pulling completely unlicensed adaptations of copyrighted American films. This particular set collects on Broadway. This particular set collects on Blu-ray the second and the third movies of the original trilogy. That's The Curse of the Aztec Mummy and The Robot versus the Aztec Mummy, which introduced luchadores and science fiction into the storyline. But it does not include the original Aztec Mummy, which, despite being heavily bootlegged, has only rarely received official releases on home video. Instead, most releases you find are of Attack of the Mayan Mummy, which was an American version that featured new scenes with American actors spliced into the original footage. The third movie in this box is The Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy, which, despite the title, is not actually a part of the Aztec Mummy series. Instead, it belongs with the Wrestling Women series, which starred luchadores Gloria Venus and Golden Ruby. The mummy featured in the movie goes by a different name and was recast as one of the good guys, in addition to the shift to focus on the two luchadors who are the stars of the Wrestling Women series. The Twilight People evolved from evil. Test tube terrors, half beast, all monster. The Twilight People is a Filipino-American horror film originally produced for Roger Corman's New World Pictures. It wound up being distributed by Dimension after Roger Corman had a falling out with his business partner at the time, Lawrence Woolner. It's about a diver who's dragged out of the ocean on an island where the sinister Dr. Gordon is experimenting on splicing humans with animals. It's the island of Dr. Moreau. It's the island of Dr. Moreau. But producer, director, co-writer Eddie Romero seems to have been of the mindset that the public domain means never having to cite your sources. In fact, this was the second time Eddie Romero had adapted Moreau without crediting the original story. In 1959, he also made the film Terror is a Man. It was the same basic story as Twilight People, an adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau that completely ignored the idea that that story even existed beforehand. There have been a ton of adaptations of The Island of Dr. Moreau, both direct and indirect. They all have their strong points and weaknesses, but, this one is the only one that can make the declaration that Pam Grier plays Ayesa, the Panther Woman. Let's see what we have here. We have Hammer Glamour favorite Britt Eklund in What the Peeper Saw. What the Peeper Saw, Britt Eklund plays the second wife of a famous author who suspects that her 12-year-old stepson is intentionally targeting her and trying to ruin her relationship with her husband. Mark Lester, who plays Paul, the stepson, was already an accomplished child actor with appearances in Danger Man, Fahrenheit 451, and he had even starred just recently before this movie was filmed in the film version of the musical Oliver. His career lasted through the 1970s, filming roles not only opposite Eklund, but also Franco Nero, Kirk Douglas, Raquel Welch, Rex Harrison. After his appearance in 1977's The Prince and the Pauper, Lester turned 18 years old and says he bought himself a Ferrari and set off on an 18-month tour of Europe, never to return to the film industry. Today he works as an osteopath and acupuncturist and is a patron of the Music Hall Guild of Great Britain and America. All right, so we've got Dark Star on Blu-ray. Dark Star, a very notorious film, actually. Co-written by John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon when they were both students at the University of South California. They shot it originally as a student project on 16mm film, and they borrowed very freely from some of their favorite science fiction authors. There are ideas in here from Philip K. Dick, from Ray Bradbury. It predated Star Wars by about 5 years, and is thought to be the first film to ever depict a spaceship jumping to hyperspace. O'Bannon created that shot inspired visually by the Stargate sequence from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. The original student film edit of Dark Star was only 45 minutes long. In 1973, Carpenter and O'Bannon secured financial assistance from Jack Murphy to shoot 50 additional minutes to flesh out the story and bring it up to around 95 minutes of length. Then John Landis discovered the movie and gave it over to Jack Harris. Jack Harris was a distributor. He cut about 30 minutes out of the film that he said were unwatchable and shot some additional scenes to splice back in their place. He also made some visual and audio edits, trying to bring the movie down to a G rating. Dan O'Bannon would later say that thanks to Harris's edits, what would have been the world's most impressive student film became the world's least impressive professional film. However, O'Bannon has said that the main alien encounter in the film led him to write a screenplay that would eventually become Alien in 1979, because he had always felt that there was a seed in those comic scenes that could make for a genuinely frightening movie if he could only secure the budget for a suitably scary alien instead of literally a beach ball. Critics absolutely hated Dark Star on its release, but Roger Ebert was actually a very early champion after it got its home video out. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars and called it, quote, one of the damnedest science fiction movies I've ever seen. All right, and it looks like next title we're back to luchadors with Batwoman and the Panther Women. Creator Alfredo Salazar was a veteran of luchador movies, including some El Santo movies. And apparently the Batman television series, being a huge success, caused him to create the story of the Batwoman, who was supposed to be tracking down a mad scientist trying to create a super race of aquatic men by splicing fish and luchadors, because, of course, why not? Star Maura Monti was not herself a luchador, but had worked as a fashion model before arriving in Mexico from Italy. Shortly after settling in Mexico, she was a part winner of the National Lottery, and the prize money helped to sponsor her efforts to pursue her acting and modeling career. Monty performs her own stunts in the film, which resulted in 2 very dangerous events. In the first, she was parasailing behind a boat when she suddenly dropped into the water. The boat continued dragging her behind it, and she would have drowned if one of the crew hadn't spotted her and leapt from the boat, helping her escape from the tangled parachute. In the second, she was supposed to be diving under the ocean, and she was supposed to touch the sand at the bottom. But when she touched the sand, it wasn't sand at all. She had the misfortune of disturbing a giant manta ray, who immediately rose from the seafloor, blacking out everything in her field of vision. The panic caused her to exhaust her oxygen tank, and the crew had to drag her back to the surface. Despite all of the danger that she faced, she reportedly loved the role of Batwoman, and while filming would actually spend her breaks strolling around town in her superhero bikini and boots combination. The Batwoman wound up being a huge success in Mexico and helped solidify Monty as a sex symbol. After appearing in 34 films in just 6 years, however, she retired from performing and modeling to focus full-time on writing, sculpture, and painting. After a few years as a television journalist and helping to found the En Vivo television magazine series, she would begin teaching classes in creative writing. At 81 years old, she still lives and teaches in San Cristobal and has been happy to field questions from curious journalists who have discovered her story thanks to The Batwoman receiving a recent restoration. Now, The Panther Woman is another film from Alfredo Salazar, and this time the titular Panther women are the villains. They are the devil-worshipping cult fighting against the noble luchadors, which include among their number Gloria Venus and Golden Ruby, who had a nice little franchise of their own running for a few years there. The restoration of both of these films on this set has been undertaken by Permanencia Voluntaria, an organization created by the granddaughter of producer Guillermo Calderón, who speaks glowingly of her grandfather's legacy as one of the first luchador film producers to focus on promoting female stars. The Panther Women also features a performance by Italian-born luchador Gerardo Zepeda, who by this time had abandoned wrestling under the name El Romano and was performing under the name El Ángel, the Angel, and had become a nemesis of El Santo in the ring, ultimately meeting El Santo in no fewer than 15 matches. All right, and here we have El Bruto. El Bruto, a 1953 drama from writer-director Luis Buñuel, best known for, take your pick, really. The discreet charm of the bourgeoisie, Belle de Jour, that obscure object of desire, or a film very familiar to jumpy film students everywhere, Un Chien Andalou. El Bruto was intended as an overt political commentary on the plight of the poor in Mexico. The story centers on a greedy landlord trying to evict his tenants so he can sell the land to a developer. So he hires Pedro El Bruto to apply pressure on the tenants, little knowing that his wife has taken a shine to Pedro herself. Many students of Buñuel think of El Bruto as one of his lesser films. It's basically just a standard drama, but I love the fact that such a classic director can have one of their lesser films preserved and available to the public, as those can be very revelatory about the priorities of the artist. All right, here we have, this is just a DVD. This is Young Hannah, Queen of the Vampires. Better known in the U.S. under its original English language title, Crypt of the Living Dead, directed by Julio Salvador, who was reportedly a huge fan of the Hammer Dracula movies. This was filmed on location in Turkey, and the island settings are, as far as many critics are concerned, the big highlight of the film. This is the unedited, widescreen color version of the movie, which is almost always seen in a very heavily edited black and white version. Teresa Gimpera, who plays young Hannah, was actually one of the favorite stars of the Barcelona School, a Catalan film movement that pushed back against the growing commercial film industry in Spain. Think of it as basically the Spanish version of the French New Wave or of the Dogme 95 style films. To date, she has appeared in over 100 movies, despite slowing down her on-screen appearances in 1984 to focus on running Gimpera Modelos, which is a modeling school that she herself founded. All right, we have the Mexican horror classics double feature, Ladrón de Cadáveres, The Body Snatcher, and El Escapulario. El Escapulario is considered a significant film in Mexico's cinematic history. It had a visual style that introduced a lot of new concepts into the nation's cinematic language, including creative color correction and POV shots. The director was the first Mexican filmmaker to direct a film in the United States, specifically for a United States producer. In 1965, Servando González Hernández directed The Fool Killer, starring Anthony Perkins. He was also, to put it lightly, a politically controversial character. He was named the General Director of the Cinema of the Presidency of the Republic after filming a massacre of student activists in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas for the government archives. Current estimates place the number of student protesters slain in the massacre as anywhere between 200 to 1,500, with exact numbers being very hard to verify due to efforts by the government to obscure the casualty count. Luis Echeverria Alvarez, the then president of Mexico, who ordered Hernandez to film the massacre and later appointed him to the General Director office, would go on to have 2 warrants for his arrest issued on charges of genocide. The Body Snatcher, the second film on this set, is one that mixes luchadores and horror yet again. This time it had a famed rudo, or in American wrestling terms, heel Wolf Ruvinsky, playing rookie wrestler Guillermo Santana in yet another story of mad scientists splicing together wrestlers and animals to create supermen. That appears to have been a very popular storyline for a while there in Mexico. This was filmed in 1957, and a lot of people credit it as the first time that the luchador genre blended with the horror genre. All right, and now up we have, look at that cover art. We have Satan's Cheerleaders. When these girls raise hell, there's the devil to pay. Directed by Riff Tracks and Mystery Science Theater 3000 favorite Graydon Clark, the same man who directed Final Justice and Star Games. This is classified as a horror comedy. The movie is about a group of high school cheerleaders whose clothes have been cursed by Satan and who are kidnapped to be offered as a sacrifice. In addition to all the King's Men star John Ireland as the sheriff, the cast features John Carradine, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Falcon Crest star Robin Greer. So Graydon Clark has a reputation for filming his movies on a very tight schedule. Apparently this was no exception. Filming on this movie was done in just 10 days. All right, and here we have an incredible rarity for VCI. This is genuinely a 4K release, and it is a 4K 50th anniversary edition of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, a cult classic that's been released under multiple titles, including Revenge of the Living Dead and Things from the Dead. This had about a $50,000 budget and was filmed in just 14 days. It's about a theater troupe who dig up an actual body for a mock ceremony and wind up accidentally raising the dead, as ya do. Director Bob Clark's third movie, he would go on after this to direct the slasher Black Christmas, the holiday favorite A Christmas Story, and coming-of-age 80s sex comedy Porky's. But he always considered this particular movie, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, to be a favorite. And at the time of his death in 2007, he was actually reportedly pitching a remake to any film studio that would talk with him. Next out of the batch here, we have, looks like Psychotronica Volume 4. Jungle Girl and the Slaver, one of the titles on here, was the second in a series following the adventures of Leanne, essentially a female version of Tarzan. She was a white goddess who was discovered in the jungles of Africa and turned out to be the granddaughter of a wealthy German businessman. Marion Michael played Leanne in the first 3 movies, and when the movie suddenly became popular outside of Germany, an additional movie was quickly produced without her in order to cash in. Also on this set is Wild Women of Wongo, which has long been a favorite of the So Bad It's Good crowd. It even earned itself a riff as part of the short-lived Mystery Science Theater spin-off The Film Crew. Now, a popular legend has it that anything from a single scene to the vast majority of the Wild Women of Wongo was directed by none other than playwright Tennessee Williams, who apparently asked the credited director if he could take a crack at running some scenes, if only for the fun of being able to say that he directed a movie once. Nobody's ever been able to corroborate the story, But a possible origin for the legend came from Gwen Harrison's conversation piece column in the Miami Herald, where the gossip columnist noted that Tennessee Williams had arrived in Miami, quote, tired of New York and wanting some sun, and then suggested that Williams might wind up on the set of the then locally filming Wild Women of Wongo. All right, and last item in the box. Yep, that's all of it. Last item in the box is Psychotronica Volume 3, the volume before the last one we just pulled out here. So here we have The Mermaids of Tiburon, and we have Yambo. Now, The Mermaids of Tiburon's director, John Lamb, originally shot and released this film with high-quality mermaid costumes as this big, fantastical film that he really was counting on to sort of solidify his place in history as a director of visual spectacles. Later on, when he decided to cash in on the exploitation market, he filmed new scenes that were filmed with nude models wearing store-bought flippers. Among them, though, was 1955 Playboy playmate Diane Weber, who would also appear in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, as well as appearing in The Trial of Billy Jack, before ultimately playing a mermaid in an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Cry of the Bewitched, or Yambo, is a title that Riff Tracks fans recognize because this film was riffed back in 2014. It is a Mexican and Cuban co-production shot almost entirely in Cuba. Star Niñon Sevilla was born in Havana in 1921, and she enjoyed a successful career in Mexico as a central figure in the subgenre known as rumberas, which were movies based around displaying the skills of popular Afro-Caribbean dancers of the time. Sevilla is one of 5 performers who appeared in a number of rumbera films, collectively referred to as the Queens of the Tropic, and they are considered the exemplary rumbera stars. Yambo is frequently considered a principal film in the canon of rumberas, despite the fact that it was one of the last rumbera films to be produced from that subgenre. So like I said, that is pretty much all of my initial order from VCI. They are a very interesting distributor who has a lot of titles that you won't find elsewhere. So tell me, out of all of those titles, what would you most be interested to see? Maybe Satan's Cheerleaders tops the top of your list. I don't judge. Anyway, I am thrilled to be back on YouTube, back making new content, and I am so happy to be sharing it with you guys out there. So until next time, watch like it means something.
I'm gonna pop some tags. Only got $20 in my pocket. I'm hunting, looking for a come up. This is fucking awesome.
Nah, walk into the club like, what up? I got a big cock. I'm just pumped. I bought some shit from a thrift shop. Ice on the fringe is so damn frosty. The people like,
damn, that's a cold ass honky.
Rolling in hella deep, headed to the mezzanine. Dressed in all pink, set my gator shoes. Those are green, draped in a leopard mink. Girl standing next to me.